in Tidewater, Virginia, in 1854. People learned early what not to say out loud. There were truths that floated through drawing rooms like cigar smoke, visible, suffocating, but never acknowledged. Truths that lived in sideways glances and abruptly changed subjects. Truths everyone understood and no one dared to name. At Belle Reve Plantation, one of those truths had a face. Actually, it had two. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Anyone with working eyes could see it. The same sharp jawline, the identical slope of the nose, the same unusual gray-green eyes that shifted in color depending on the light. Even the way they carried themselves, shoulders slightly back, chin lifted with unconscious pride, each other with unsettling precision. But one young man wore tailored linen, silk cravats, and polished boots. He rode thoroughbreds across manicured lawns and spoke confidently about politics and law. The other wore coarse cotton and walked barefoot in red Virginia mud. He cut tobacco until his palms split open and lowered his eyes whenever a white man passed in a society built on rigid hierarchy, bloodlines, and ownership. Such similarities were not just awkward, they were dangerous. Belle Reve stood like a monument to old Virginia wealth. Its white columns gleamed in the summer sun, visible from nearly a mile away along the James River. The plantation stretched across 800 acres of fertile tobacco land, a private kingdom ruled by Alistair Dandridge. The main house had 16 rooms filled with imported furniture from London and Paris. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings, painted with delicate plasterwork. 3 locked cabinets held polished silver engraved with the Dandridge crest. But the true measure of Alistair Dandridge's wealth wasn't displayed in glass cases. It was recorded in a leather-bound ledger. 63 names each, followed by a dollar amount. Each human life assigned a value in ink. Alistair was 47 that summer, tall, broad-faced, his thinning brown hair combed carefully to disguise the widening bald spot at his crown. His complexion carried the permanent flush of whiskey and heavy meals. And his eyes, those distinctive gray-green Dandridge eyes, were known in 4 counties. His father had them. His grandfather had them. Their painted likenesses lined the hallway walls, gazing down from gilded frames as if guarding the family's reputation. Alistair prized legacy above all else, which is why his son, Thomas, mattered so much. Thomas Dandridge was 22, recently returned from 3 years at the University of Virginia. He had studied law. He had learned how to argue a point without raising his voice. He carried himself with polished ease. He was, by every outward measure, the future of Belle Reve. He had inherited his father's height, his father's posture, his father's gray-green eyes. But Thomas had also inherited something less convenient, a quiet discomfort with cruelty, a hesitation he kept carefully hidden. He understood that sympathy toward enslaved people could be interpreted as weakness, or worse, disloyalty to his own class. So he said nothing. At Belle Reve, silence was survival, especially for Samuel Dot. Samuel had been born in the slave quarters. In March of 1832, the same year Thomas was born in the main house. His mother, Ara, was a house servant. She worked indoors, wore cleaner clothing than field hands, and endured her labor under watchful ceilings rather than open skies. People sometimes called her fortunate. There was nothing fortunate about belonging to someone. When Ara was 20, Alistair Dandridge had taken an interest in her. On a plantation, an enslaved woman's refusal did not exist as an option. Months later, her pregnancy was explained away with tight smiles and polite silence. No one asked questions that might disturb the social order. Samuel was born 2 months after Thomas Dot at first. The resemblance between the boys could be dismissed as coincidence. Babies shared features. Toddlers changed. But as they grew, the similarities sharpened instead of fading. By 5 years old, Samuel had the same narrow nose. By 10, the same strong jawline. By adolescence, the same gray-green eyes. Old Jeremiah, who had lived long enough to see 3 Dandridge generations come and go, once muttered under his breath that the boy in the quarters looked more like a Dandridge than some legitimate cousins in Richmond. He was careful to say it only once. Ara saw the resemblance every day. She loved her son fiercely, but his face carried the features of the man who had claimed her body without consent. It was a cruelty layered on top of another cruelty. She taught Samuel what every enslaved child learned early. Stay quiet. Avoid attention. Do not be noticed. Especially not by white men. Especially not by your father. Thomas noticed, too. He was 16 the first time. The recognition struck him with full force. Late afternoon sunlight had caught Samuel's profile near the barn, illuminating the line of his face. For one disorienting second, Thomas felt as if he were staring into a distorted reflection. Samuel lowered his eyes immediately. That instinct, that automatic fear, unsettled Thomas more than the resemblance itself. He never confronted his father. He never asked the question pressing against his conscience, because asking would require hearing the answer. So the plantation continued, as it always had, built on routines. Wealth, denial. Everyone knew. No one said. Until the camera arrived. In July of 1854, a traveling photographer named Silas Croft pulled his wagon up the long oak-lined drive of Belle Reve. Photography was still new enough to feel like alchemy, images fixed permanently in silver, proof that something had existed exactly as it appeared. Alistair had commissioned formal portraits of the family and the house. A man of his stature required permanence. Silas set up his equipment on the front lawn, angling his camera toward the bright white columns. Daguerreotypes required long exposure, times, and perfect stillness. A single accidental movement could ruin a plate dot. Late that afternoon, as he prepared to test exposure, 2 figures entered his frame without realizing it. Thomas stepped out from the main house, passed through the shot at the same moment, 15 feet apart, unaware. Silas had already removed the lens cap. The exposure lasted just long enough. That evening, Silas developed the plate. When the image surfaced in silver relief, he felt the air leave his lungs. 2 profiles, side by side, same bone structure. Same eyes, same posture. Different without intention. Stared back at him. It was not subtle. It was not DENIABLE. It was a secret made permanent. And in the South of 1854, there were some truths powerful enough to destroy everything. Silas Croft did not sleep that night. The small oil lamp inside his wagon burned low, throwing restless shadows against the wooden walls as the silver plate cooled on the work table. He had developed thousands of images in the past 4 years. Proud families, stiff brides, plantation owners posed beside columns as if architecture alone proved virtue. But he had never seen anything like this. He lifted the daguerreotype again, tilting it carefully so the image caught the LAMPLIGHT. 2 young men, frozen in profile. One dressed in pressed linen, posture relaxed with inherited authority. The other in coarse cotton, shoulders slightly tightened as if bracing for something unseen. The resemblance was not partial. It was exact. The same jawline, the same straight nose, the same high brow. Even the subtle curve of the mouth was shared between them. The only undeniable difference was skin tone. Silas exhaled slowly. He had worked across Virginia long enough to understand what he was looking at. Plantations were filled with children, who bore the features of their owners. It was one of the South's most poorly kept secrets, but secrets relied on something crucial. Purauji burudini, out of this plate, offered none. A likeness could be argued away in conversation. It could be dismissed as imagination or coincidence. But a photograph was different. A photograph did not stutter. It did not blush. It did not look away. It recorded. Silas set the plate down and rubbed a hand across his face. Destroying it would be simple. One drop onto the wagon floor, and the silver would crack beyond repair. No one would ever know, except him. And perhaps that was what unsettled him most. He had not meant to capture the image. There had been no political intention, no desire to expose anything. He was simply testing light and angle. But now the truth existed in metal and mercury. And once truth exists in that form, destroying it feels less like caution and more like complicity. Outside, Belle Reeve slept peacefully. Inside the main house, Alistair Dandridge finished a final glass of whiskey in his study. The ledger lay open before him, neat columns of ink reflecting lamplight. He took comfort in numbers. Numbers behaved. Numbers obeyed logic. People were more complicated. He had noticed the photographer's lingering attention that afternoon. Not unusual. Outsiders often stared longer than they should. Still, something in Silas Croft's expression had felt observant. Alistair disliked being observed. Across the hall, Thomas sat alone in the library, a book open but unread in his lap. He had seen the photographer adjusting his camera earlier. He had also seen Samuel crossing the yard at that exact moment, and he had felt a chill he could not explain. Thomas was not a foolish man. He knew what others whispered when they thought he could not hear. He had caught passing glances between house servants. He had noticed visiting cousins staring too long at Samuel's face. The resemblance was no longer subtle, dotted head sharpened with age. Thomas rose and crossed to the window. The moon cast pale light over the yard below. The slave quarters sat in darkness at the edge of the property, physically close, yet separated by an invisible wall more powerful than distance. He wondered, not for the first time, whether Samuel knew, whether he understood what it meant to carry a face that mirrored the master's son. In the quarters, Samuel lay awake on his narrow pallet. He had felt the camera's gaze, not physically, but instinctively. Enslaved people developed a sense for being watched. It was a survival skill. When the photographer's lens pointed toward the house, Samuel had tried to step quickly through the yard without drawing attention, but he had felt it. The exposure, the stillness. He did not know why the sensation lingered, like a bruise. Ara, sleeping lightly beside the wall, sensed her son's restlessness. "Keep your head down," she whispered into the dark. It was advice she had given him since childhood. It was advice that had kept them both alive. Morning arrived, heavy with humidity. Silas packed his equipment carefully. He developed the formal family portrait first, Alistair seated rigidly in the center, Evelyn beside him with folded hands, Thomas standing tall behind them. The image was exactly what wealthy families expected. Order, dignity, permanence. No cracks visible. He presented the plate to Alistair in the front parlor. "Excellent work," Alistair said, examining it with satisfaction. "You've captured the strength of the house." Silas forced a polite smile. Strength. That was one word for it. "Shall I prepare duplicates for extended family?" Silas asked carefully. "Of course," Alistair replied. "Reputation should travel." The words landed with unintended irony. Silas felt the hidden plate in his equipment chest like a weight. By midday, his wagon was loaded. He paused once more before climbing onto the driver's seat. He could still destroy it right now. Instead, he reached into the chest, wrapped the daguerreotype in cloth, and slid it into a smaller wooden box beneath his personal belongings, not with the commission plates. Separate, protected. He told himself it was caution, that he would decide later what to do. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was curious, and curiosity, in 1854, Virginia, could be explosive. As the wagon wheels rolled down the long drive, Catherine Dandridge watched from an upstairs window. Her sharp eyes missed little. She had seen the photographer's expression when he packed. She had seen Thomas watching Samuel in the yard. Catherine understood patterns, and she understood scandal. By evening, Silas reached Petersburg, a bustling river city where tobacco warehouses stood beside print shops and newspapers. The world felt louder here, less insulated by plantation pride. He rented a small room above a printer's shop owned by Douglas Webb. Webb specialized in reproducing images, wood engravings, based on he supplied illustrations for regional papers and political pamphlets. Silas hesitated before knocking on the shop door. This was the line. Crossing it meant involvement. Webb greeted him with ink-stained fingers and professional enthusiasm. Anything interesting this trip? Webb asked casually. Silas placed the wrapped plate on the counter. Webb lifted it toward the window light. His expression shifted, then stilled. Well, Webb murmured quietly, that's unfortunate. Or important? Silas replied. Webb glanced toward the street, then back at the image. You understand what this suggests? I do. And you understand what could happen if this circulates. Silas nodded. In the South, accusing a respected planter of fathering enslaved children was not new, proving it was something else entirely. A printed reproduction could travel. Newspaper engraving could be passed hand to hand. Evidence did not remain contained. Webb set the plate down slowly. Do you want it, he asked. The question hung in the air like a loaded pistol. Silas thought of Bellerive's white columns, of the ledger with 63 names, of two young men standing 15 feet apart, divided by law, but bound by blood. Yes, he said finally. In that single word, the fragile silence surrounding Bellerive began to crack. Douglas Webb did not work recklessly. He closed the shop early that evening, bolting the front door and pulling the curtains tight before setting the daguerreotype beneath a bright drafting lamp. The image gleamed cold and undeniable in the light. Once this becomes an engraving, Webb said quietly, it stops being a private observation. Silas stood across from him, arms folded. That's the point. Webb studied him. You're certain? Silas wasn't certain of anything, except that destroying the plate would mean choosing comfort over truth, and he had seen too much of that already. Webb began sketching. The process required translating the silver image into lines sharp enough for printing. Every stroke deepened the resemblance. Every shadow strengthened the accusation. Two young men, same face, different fates. By midnight, the first engraving block was finished. They did not attach names. They did not need to. Below the image, Webb etched a simple caption, a study in Southern kinship. It was subtle. It was devastating. Within 3 days, 50 small broadsides were printed. Not full newspapers, just single sheets meant to circulate quietly. Petersburg was a city of trade and transit. What appeared there rarely stayed contained. The first copy reached Richmond by the end of the week. The second reached Norfolk. By the following Sunday, one found its way back toward Tidewater, back toward Bellerive. Thomas first saw the image in the most ordinary way possible. He had ridden into town to purchase law books and correspondence paper. At a general store counter, he noticed two men standing close together, heads bent over something. They fell silent when he entered. Thomas recognized that silence. He had lived inside it his entire life. One of the men folded the paper quickly. Too quickly. Thomas stepped forward calmly. Is something amiss? The shopkeeper hesitated. Then, perhaps sensing inevitability, he slid the broadside across the counter without a word. Thomas looked down. The world narrowed. He did not need time to process it. He recognized his own profile immediately. And beside it, Samuel, captured in silver lines. Exact, unmistakable. The resemblance that had always lived in glances and whispers now existed in ink. Permanent. Public. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Where did this come from? He asked evenly. Petersburg, the shopkeeper replied. They're saying it's making its rounds. They're saying. The phrase echoed. Thomas folded the paper with deliberate care and placed coins on the counter. He rode home faster than he intended. At Bellerive, Catherine Dandridge was the first to hear. A neighbor's carriage had stopped at the gate under the pretense of returning borrowed china. The visit lasted only 12 minutes, long enough for raised eyebrows and thin smiles. Catherine closed the door slowly after the woman left. She had not been shown the image. She had only been told enough. Her instincts sharpened immediately. When Thomas entered the house later that afternoon, Catherine was waiting in the hallway. You look pale, she observed. Thomas handed her the folded broadside without a word. Catherine opened it. Her face drained of color, not from surprise, but from confirmation. Well, she said, after a long silence, someone has decided to be brave, or foolish. Alistair was summoned from his study. He examined the engraving, without visible reaction at first, but his hand tightened around the paper. This is slander, he said flatly. Thomas met his father's eyes. Is it? The unspoken question hung between them. Alistair's gaze hardened. Whoever distributed this will regret it. It looks exactly like us, Catherine said coolly. That will be difficult to argue. Alistair turned sharply. Coincidence. Exaggeration. Artistic manipulation. But even as he spoke, the confidence in his voice faltered. Because he knew what everyone knew. The problem was not the accusation. The problem was the evidence. Word reached the quarters by dusk. Enslaved communities survived on information carried in whispers, faster and more accurate than any newspaper. Samuel felt the shift immediately. Eyes lingered on him longer than usual. Conversation stopped when he approached. Old Jeremiah pressed something folded into his hand without meeting his gaze. Be careful, the old man murmured. Samuel unfolded the paper slowly. He stared at it for a long time. He had always known. Children notice. Things adults pretend not to see. He had grown up watching Thomas from a distance, recognizing the mirrored movements, the shared expressions. But seeing it captured, flattened into proof, struck differently. It made denial impossible. Ara found him sitting outside the quarters, the paper trembling slightly in his grip. Her breath caught when she saw the image. She did not need explanation. They shouldn't have done this, she whispered. Samuel looked up at her. Done what? He asked quietly. Told the truth. Her eyes filled. Not with shame, but with fear. Truth did not protect people like them. Truth exposed them. And exposed things could be destroyed. By nightfall, Bellerive was no longer insulated. 2 neighboring plantations had received copies. Minister in Richmond had referenced visual evidence of moral decay in a Sunday sermon. The engraving had become conversation. Conversation had become accusation. Alistair paced his study, the broadside crumpled on his desk. This was not simply gossip. This threatened legitimacy, inheritance, power. If Thomas's status were questioned, if the image cast doubt on lineage, decades of carefully constructed reputation could unravel. And worse, abolitionist papers in the North were known to seize upon material like this. An engraving like that, reprinted beyond Virginia, could become propaganda, a weapon. He stopped pacing. This ends now, he muttered. Upstairs, Thomas sat alone with a candle burning low. For the first time in his life, he felt something break. Inside him, not from humiliation, but from clarity. The image had forced into daylight what he had long avoided. Naming Samuel was his brother. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. By blood, and blood, once acknowledged, demanded reckoning. Outside, in the quarters, Samuel lay awake once more. But this time, it was not the feeling of being watched that kept him from sleep. It was the realization that for the first time in his life, the world could see him clearly. And visibility, in Virginia in 1854, was both power and peril. The morning air was cold and biting when Evelyn Dandridge received the first of many letters. She unfolded each envelope carefully, scanning for subtle clues. The polite cursive of acquaintances, the formal signatures of friends, neighbors, and business contacts. Every word carried its weight, but the meaning was unmistakable. The rumor of the daguerreotype had reached them. Thomas. "Come here," Evelyn called sharply, though her voice betrayed no panic. He appeared at the doorway, still dressed from his morning ride. "Mother." She handed him the first letter. "Do you see this? The Norfolk circles are buzzing. They've received copies of that newspaper you supposedly read. The Liberty Standard, and they're talking." Thomas unfolded the letter, eyes scanning rapidly. The words were careful, polite, but the message was blunt. The Dandridge name was being questioned, the family's reputation openly whispered about, and their social and political connections threatened. He swallowed. "They know," he said quietly. "Yes," Evelyn said, "and they will not forget. The photograph cannot be unseen. People have seen it, discussed it, circulated it." Her voice tightened. "You do understand what this means for all of us?" Thomas nodded. He understood more than she did. It was not just reputation at stake. The image revealed a truth that could not be hidden. Samuel, the child of a slave, bore his father's blood. Thomas had known the resemblance for years, but seeing it validated in print was something else entirely. Across town, Beatrice Caldwell sipped her tea with meticulous precision. She had heard whispers for weeks. Hints of the engraving, traveling through Petersburg, Richmond, and Norfolk. But now she held the confirmation in her hands. She smiled faintly as she looked at the copy of the Liberty Standard. The paper was doing exactly what she had hoped. When Evelyn, Catherine, and Thomas arrived at Beatrice's Norfolk estate for the social tea, the room shifted instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Women adjusted their fans, glanced covertly at each other, and whispered. They had come for polite gossip, for cultivated charm, and now the scandal was laid bare before them. Beatrice rose from her chair, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Dandridge family, what a pleasure. We've been so eager to meet you." Evelyn forced a smile. "Delighted to be here," she said carefully, hiding the tension coiling in her chest. Beatrice's eyes sparkled with controlled satisfaction. "I thought you might be interested in recent developments." She reached into her bag and produced a folded newspaper. A hush fell over the room as she opened it, the Liberty Standard displayed for all to see. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She recognized the article immediately. The illustration, the text, the subtle yet undeniable accusation. The photograph, Beatrice announced, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. Quite remarkable, isn't it? Such uncanny resemblance. The article makes some very bold claims about the nature of familial relationships in your household. Catherine's hand clenched around her teacup. She felt a surge of fury, mortification, and disbelief all at once. "That is slander," she said, voice sharp but quiet. "Oh, but it's so much more than slander," Beatrice said smoothly. "It's evidence, isn't it? Proof the newspapers up north can't ignore. People will talk. People will question." She looked pointedly at Thomas. "And young Master Thomas, I understand you've taken a keen interest in the welfare of your family's slaves. Such progressive behavior." Thomas's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. His mother's eyes met his calm but warning. He forced himself to remain composed. By the end of the tea, the damage was done. The Dandridge family left in near silence, their faces masks of civility that barely concealed the storm inside. Evelyn was already planning her exit. Charleston would be a safe haven, a place to retreat from the relentless public scrutiny that Beatrice had engineered. "Mother, are you leaving now?" Thomas asked as they rode back to Belrive. "Yes," Evelyn said flatly. "I cannot remain in this house while our history, our sins, are paraded before the world. I will take Catherine with me. We will distance ourselves from this disgrace. And Thomas," Evelyn's voice softened slightly as she looked at him, "you have a choice. You can leave with us. Retreat from this scandal. Protect your future, your prospects." Thomas shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm staying." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You are choosing." "What?" "To face it," Thomas said. "To do what is right. I cannot abandon Samuel Aurora. They are my family, as much as anyone here. I will not turn my back on them, not when I have the power to act differently." Alistair looked at him, a mixture of shock and incredulity. "You're throwing away everything," he said quietly. "Your social prospects, your political future, your inheritance." Thomas met his father's eyes without fear. "I am inheriting nothing built on lies. I refuse to participate in a system that pretends these people do not exist." The room went silent. Even Catherine's usually sharp voice faltered. Alistair's expression hardened, but he could not deny the determination in his son's tone. The next weeks were filled with escalating tension. Letters arrived daily, each one subtle, each one threatening social consequence. The engraving had spread beyond Norfolk. Now it was circulating in Richmond, Petersburg, and even reaching small towns along the river. Friends and acquaintances whispered about the Dandridge scandal, questioning marriages, business dealings, and character dots. Inside Belrive, the family was fracturing under the weight of the exposure. Catherine demanded immediate action. Sell Samuel and Era South. Remove them from sight. Erase the evidence. Thomas refused. "They are not evidence," he insisted. "They are human beings. We cannot erase them just because it is convenient." Alistair remained torn. He had long exercised authority without question, his power absolute. But Thomas's words, calm, principled, unyielding, struck deeper than any threat or argument. Evelyn's departure gave him room to think. Perhaps it was time to reckon with the consequences he had long avoided. Perhaps it was time to honor the one promise he had made decades ago, to Ara and to Samuel. And so, quietly, Alistair made arrangements. The sale of Samuel O'Reara was no longer an option. Instead, he reluctantly began preparing legal documents, a first step toward freedom, though the process would take weeks, and the risk of backlash from society remained high. Thomas spent long evenings visiting the quarters, speaking with Samuel and Ara, learning about their lives, their fears, and their strength. Every conversation illuminated the injustice that had shaped their existence. The realization that his father had chosen power over humanity, comfort over morality, haunted him. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Thomas asked Samuel one night, sitting together by candlelight. "Tell who?" Samuel replied. "And for what? We are property. We are shadows in the world we live in. Speak up, and you are punished. Speak out, and you disappear. It's been that way my whole life." Thomas listened, ashamed. He had known in part, but it acted as if ignorance was protection. Now, confronted with the full truth, he felt the weight of complicity. Ara, standing quietly nearby, placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "He sees now," she said softly. "And that is something." "Yes," Thomas said, voice low but steady. "And I will do something about it." The Liberty Standard continued to circulate in abolitionist circles, each copy strengthening the growing perception of moral decay among Virginia's elite. Northern newspapers picked up the story. Discussions spread among clergy, merchants, and academics. The image was no longer just a family secret. It was an undeniable indictment of a system built on exploitation. Within Bellerive, the household adjusted. The servants whispered among themselves, curiosity tempered by relief. Samuel's freedom was becoming a possibility, though no one spoke openly of it yet. Thomas's presence signaled a change, a rare acknowledgement that their lives mattered, beyond the plantation's profit or reputation. Alistair remained isolated, the weight of his own legacy pressing down. Friends began to drift away. Invitations stopped arriving. Political alliances frayed. The engraving had done its work, revealing truths that society had been trained to ignore. And in the quiet moments, Thomas contemplated the road ahead. The scandal had shaken everything, but it had also given him clarity. One photograph, captured by accident, had exposed decades of lies, and now he would act. Not for society, not for reputation, not for legacy, but for justice and for his family, the one his father had attempted to erase. The stage was set. The scandal was out in the open. Decisions that had been postponed for decades now demanded immediate action, and Thomas Dandridge, long accustomed to silence and denial, was ready to break both, to ensure that Samuel and Ara would claim the life that had been stolen from them. The family's world had been irreversibly altered. The question now was not if the scandal would continue, it was how each of them would survive it. The morning of the decision was quiet. Sunlight cut through the tall windows of Bellerive, falling on the polished floors and the portraits of long-dead Dandridge ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to watch everything, silent witnesses to the sins and secrets of generations. Thomas walked with purpose toward his father's study, each step measured, resolute. Alistair Dandridge sat alone, a glass of whiskey in hand, the weight of weeks pressing on his shoulders. The scandal, the letters, the whispers, the photograph, all of it had changed the air in the house. The conversations, even the silence. Thomas stopped at the doorway. "Father," he said simply. Alistair looked up, the familiar mix of irritation and fatigue in his eyes. "You're still here," he said, voice low. "Yes," Thomas replied, "and I've made a decision. I'm staying, not to serve you, not to protect our name, but to do what's right. You've ignored your responsibilities for decades. Now it's time to correct some of the harm you've caused." Alistair's jaw tightened. "You mean? What exactly?" "I mean Samuel and Ara," Thomas said. "They deserve their freedom. It's overdue. You can't hide behind wealth, influence, or tradition anymore. Sign the papers. Free them. Give them the chance to live as human beings, not property." For a moment, silence filled the study. Alistair's hand trembled as he set down the whiskey. Memories of decades past, of promises made in guilt and weakness, of the life he had shaped around lies, pressed down on him. "Do it," Thomas said, firm but not unkind. "Do it now. It's the right thing. No excuses. No delay." Alistair stared at his son, the anger, fear, and pride battling inside him. Finally, he picked up the documents Thomas had prepared with a slow, deliberate hand. He signed the manumission papers. Ara and Samuel would no longer be slaves. They would have legal standing, rights, and at least a fighting chance at a future beyond Belrive. Thomas went immediately to the slave quarters. Carrying the papers in a small bag with cash and provisions, Ara opened the door, surprise and caution written on her face. "Master Thomas," she said quietly, a polite mask over the tension in her shoulders. Thomas placed the documents in her hands. "Read these," he said. "They're for you and Samuel. You're free. All of you." Ara's hands shook as she unfolded the papers. She scanned the words, unable to fully process what she was seeing. Freedom. Real, legal freedom. After 20 years of slavery, after bearing the child of the man who owned her life, after enduring the daily terror of sale or punishment, she was free. Samuel emerged from the back of the cabin, cautious but alert. He looked at Thomas, then at the papers. His eyes widened. "It's real," he whispered. "Yes," Thomas said, voice low. "It's real. And there's more cash for a start, so you can make your way north, somewhere safe, somewhere you can build a life without fear." Tears streamed down Ara's face as she gathered her son and embraced him. Samuel, still tense but relieved, shook Thomas's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me," Thomas replied. "It's the least I could do. You were owed this from the start." 2 days later, Ara and Samuel departed Belrive at dawn. Thomas watched from the balcony as they walked toward the carriage that would take them north. The weight in his chest was complicated. Relief, grief, hope, and guilt all tangled together. They were free, but their freedom had come decades too late, and the scars of their years in bondage would remain. Back inside, the house felt emptier than it had in years. Alistair remained at Belrive, surrounded by wealth and portraits and empty rooms. His social connections were severed. Friends had drifted away. Business relationships had soured. The photograph, the Liberty Standard article, and the spread of scandal had permanently tarnished the family name. Money could not buy back the trust or respect that was lost. Evelyn never returned. She settled in Charleston with Catherine, keeping her distance from the plantation and the man whose actions had humiliated her for decades. The southern social circles that had once courted the Dandridges no longer sought them out. Reputation, it seemed, could not survive exposure. Thomas stayed, quietly reorganizing the plantation. His first task was not wealth or comfort. It was justice. He began paying those who had remained on the land as free laborers, gradually transitioning Belrive from a plantation of enslaved people to a working farm of free workers. He offered opportunities for education, for wages, and for dignity. Slowly, painfully, he attempted to right the wrongs his family had inflicted. Ara and Samuel settled in Philadelphia by April 1855. Ara had relatives in the free black community who welcomed them and helped them find housing and work. Samuel apprenticed with a carpenter, eventually opening a small shop of his own. They married, raised children, and lived to see the Civil War end, slavery across the nation. Every letter from Thomas was a reminder that, though separated by miles, their connection had not been. Thomas never married. The shadow of Belrive's history haunted him. He dedicated his life to the careful, deliberate task of dismantling the systems of injustice he had inherited, starting with his own family. It was a quiet revolution, built on incremental change, accountability, and the refusal to ignore what was right. The daguerreotype that had started it all. The original plate captured by Silas Croft was destroyed. Silas, horrified at what his photograph had unleashed, had smashed it. But copies remained. Those copies circulated in abolitionist circles for decades, exposing hypocrisy, documenting cruelty, and forcing uncomfortable truths into the light. Historians later labeled the image simply, Two Sons of the South. Its power was undeniable. One photograph, accidental, fleeting, captured a truth that could not be erased. Not just the Dandridge family's sins, but the broader horror of the institution of slavery, the impossible line drawn between human beings based on skin and status. And that was the lesson Thomas carried with him every day. Seeing the truth was not enough. Action was required. Justice was not inherited. It was earned through courage, principle, and sacrifice. The story of Samuel, Ara, and Thomas, of the photograph that exposed a family and a society, endured. And even as the years passed, it reminded those who learned it that one moment, one image, one act of courage could change the course of lives, and even history itself. If you found this story powerful and want to keep uncovering incredible true stories that reveal hidden histories, injustices, and remarkable courage, subscribe now. You won't want to miss the next story. That will make you see history and the people in it in a whole new way.